The humid New Orleans air clung to Grace Morgan like a second skin, thick with the scent of fried oysters and blooming jasmine. She moved through the crowded jazz club with the practiced ease of a dancer, trays laden with clinking glasses and steaming plates. Her smile, a professional mask, never quite reached her eyes. At 31, a single mother to a boy who needed everything she couldn't quite afford, every shift was a tightrope walk over an abyss of bills. Her worn-out tennis shoes, hidden beneath her long black skirt, were a testament to countless hours on her feet, each step a silent prayer for the rent, for Liam's special education tuition, for just a little breathing room. She'd snuck a glance at her phone earlier, a text from the after-school program. "Liam made you something special." A small, proud smile had finally touched her lips. She pictured his earnest face, his bright, curious eyes, and the art portfolio he guarded like treasure. That portfolio, stuffed with crayon drawings of fantastical creatures, was her true north. It was why she was here, enduring the incessant clamor, the endless demands, the fleeting moments of human connection that evaporated as quickly as the steam from a hurricane cocktail. Tonight, however, was supposed to be different. A blind date set up by a well-meaning but utterly clueless co-worker. He was at table 7, a man named Marcus. He'd seemed charming enough at first, all easy smiles and compliments, his eyes lingering a little too long on her mouth. He'd ordered a bottle of their most expensive Cabernet, followed by the blackened redfish and a shrimp étouffée. Grace had served him, her professional smile firmly in place, even as a knot tightened in her stomach. Every luxury he chose felt like a lead weight dragging on her already fragile budget. Then, just as she was clearing the appetizer plates, he'd leaned in, a flicker of something calculating in his eyes. "Bathroom break," he'd said, his voice a little too casual. "Be right back." He hadn't been back. Grace waited 5 minutes, then 10. Her gut churned. The wine bottle was half empty, the main courses barely touched. She knew, with a cold certainty that seeped into her bones. He was gone, ditched, and the bill, a staggering $187.50, was now hers. Her hand trembled as she picked up the receipt, the numbers mocking her. She had exactly 2 crumpled dollar bills tucked into her apron pocket, a meager emergency stash. $2. The humiliation burned, a hot, bitter taste in her mouth. She could feel the stares, or imagined them, dissecting her, pitying her, her cheeks flushed. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a spectacle, a discarded woman left holding the bag. How could she possibly explain this? Her pride, usually a fortress, felt like it was crumbling brick by brick. Across the room, at a prime table overlooking the street, Enzo Moretti sat. He was a man who didn't need to speak to command attention. His presence alone was a gravitational pull. Dark suit, dark eyes, a stillness that was both elegant and unnerving. He hadn't been watching her date, not really. He'd been watching her. He saw the tired efficiency in her movements, the subtle flinch when a customer snapped their fingers, the way her shoulders held a silent burden, and he saw the moment Marcus vanished, the slow, dawning realization on her face, the quiet devastation that followed. His eyes, dark and assessing, sharpened. The air around his table, already charged, seemed to crackle with an unspoken energy, a silent acknowledgement of the quiet struggle playing out before him. He didn't move, but a muscle in his jaw clenched, almost imperceptibly. Grace, her world spiraling, felt a prickle on the back of her neck, a strange awareness of being observed, truly observed, for the first time all night. Grace stared at the receipt, her vision blurring at the edges. $187.50. It might as well have been $1,000,000. Her pulse hammered in her ears, a frantic drumbeat of panic and shame. She couldn't pay it. not without sacrificing Liam's summer camp fund, not without dipping into the emergency cash for his therapy. It wasn't just money, it was her son's future, laid bare and vulnerable on a greasy table. Her hand, still clutching the 2 crumpled dollars, felt cold. She considered her options, each one worse than the last. Begging the manager? Taking out a cash advance she couldn't afford? The thought of admitting her predicament, of letting her carefully constructed facade of control shatter, made her stomach clench. Her chin lifted fractionally. No, she wouldn't crumble. Not here, not now. She would figure it out. She always did. Just as she was steeling herself to approach her manager, Mr. Thibodeau, he suddenly appeared at her table. His usual boisterous demeanor was muted, his eyes darting quickly to the half-eaten food, then to the bill. He cleared his throat. "Grace, darling," he said, his voice surprisingly soft. "Listen, there seems to be a misunderstanding with this tab. The house is going to comp a significant portion. Let's just say the date wasn't up to our usual standards of clientele." He gave her a wink, a gesture so out of character it made Grace's brow furrow. "Just clear the rest, all right? Consider it a discount for a loyal employee." A discount? Her manager, a man who nickel and dimed the tips, was offering a discount on a bill incurred by a runaway. Date. Grace was sharp. Too sharp to miss the awkwardness in Thibodeau's eyes, the way he avoided her gaze. This wasn't a random act of kindness. Someone had intervened. But who? She didn't have any rich friends, and her family certainly wasn't bailing her out. She glanced around the room, a prickle of unease settling on her skin. Then a shadow fell over her table. A scent of expensive cologne, woodsy and masculine, replaced the cloying sweetness of the club. Enzo Moretti stood there, a quiet force of nature in a bespoke suit. His dark eyes, which had been watching her from across the room, now held hers directly. There was no pity in them, only an intense, almost predatory assessment that made her heart skip a beat. "Miss Morgan," he said, his voice a low rumble, surprisingly gentle despite its underlying authority. "Allow me." He didn't ask. He stated it. He reached for the receipt, his fingers brushing hers, sending a jolt through her. Grace snatched her hand back, her pride flaring. "Mr. Moretti," she said, her voice tight, "that's not necessary. Mr. Thibodeau has already taken care of it." She hated the tremor in her voice. She hated feeling exposed. He chuckled, a soft, dry sound that barely reached her ears, but vibrated through her nonetheless. "Thibodeau is a good man," he conceded, his gaze never leaving hers. "But some debts are best settled by the person who incurred them. Or," he paused, a slight knowing smile playing on his lips, "by someone who believes a woman of your caliber shouldn't be left in such a position." His eyes flicked briefly to the half-eaten food, then back to her. "Consider it a courtesy. I'm a patron of this establishment, and I appreciate good service and good waitresses." Grace felt a flush creep up her neck. He wasn't offering charity. He was offering a statement, a challenge almost. "I don't need charity," she insisted, though her resolve was wavering under his unwavering gaze. Enzo leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a near whisper for her ears alone. "It's not charity, Miss Morgan. It's an investment in stability, in the respect that should be afforded to those who work hard." His eyes hardened almost imperceptibly. "And that gentleman who left you, he won't be gracing my establishment again." The emphasis on "my" was subtle, yet chillingly clear. He didn't just eat here, he owned it. And by extension, he owned the space she stood in, the air she breathed. He was not just a patron, he was the proprietor, the protector, and by implication, the punisher. The subtle hint of danger, the quiet assertion of power, sent a shiver down her spine. It wasn't a threat, not exactly, but a promise of consequence for someone else. For the first time all night, the humiliation gave way to a flicker of something else, awe tinged with a terrifying curiosity. He wasn't like other men. He saw her, truly saw her, not just the waitress, not just the woman who'd been ditched, but the resilient, proud woman beneath. She swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. "Fine," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you." He simply nodded, a brief, almost imperceptible dip of his head. He pulled out a crisp $100 bill and laid it on the table, covering the receipt, then turned and walked away, his presence lingering long after he'd returned to his table. Grace stood there, rooted to the spot, the heat of his gaze still on her skin, her guard up, but undeniably, irrevocably, a spark of something new ignited within her. Grace tried to scrub the memory of that night from her mind, tried to convince herself that Enzo Moretti's intervention was nothing more than an eccentric act of kindness from a wealthy patron. She worked her usual shifts, smiled her usual smiles, but a part of her felt bruised, raw. The incident had left an indelible mark, a searing humiliation she couldn't quite shake. Every time a customer glanced her way, she imagined them seeing the woman who'd been ditched, the one rescued by the enigmatic boss. A few days later, a discreet delivery arrived at her cramped shotgun apartment, a small, elegant box tied with a simple twine. There was no card, no sender's name. Inside, nestled on crisp parchment, was a perfectly cooked snapper, a vibrant Creole sauce glistening beside it, and a tiny, delicate beignet, still warm, a fine dusting of powdered sugar clinging to its surface. The subtle, sweet scent of beignet sugar dust filled her small kitchen, instantly transporting her back to the club, to Enzo's unwavering gaze. It was a gourmet meal, clearly from his restaurant, a ghost of a favor, a silent, unsettling reminder that he hadn't forgotten her. She stared at it, a knot of suspicion tightening in her stomach, even as her mouth watered. She tried to push the unsettling gift, and the man who sent it, aside. But the world had other ways of reminding her of her precarious position. Mr. Dubois, her landlord, made his menacing visit on a sweltering Tuesday afternoon. He didn't knock so much as pound, rattling the old wooden doorframe. Grace's heart sank even before she opened it. Dubois was a man molded from cheap suits and expensive cigars, his eyes constantly scanning, assessing, calculating. He smelled of stale smoke and something vaguely metallic. "Rent, Morgan," he barked, not even bothering with a greeting as he pushed past her into the tiny living room. Her son Liam's bright crayon drawings, tacked haphazardly to the wall, seemed to shrink under his disdainful gaze. "It's past due. Again." Grace clutched her apron, her knuckles white. "Mr. Dubois, I just need another week. My tips were down this month, and Liam's special ed tuition—" He cut her off with a dismissive wave of a meaty hand. "Special education. That sounds like a luxury, Morgan, not a necessity. You want to live in this city, you pay your dues. Or you find somewhere cheaper, plenty of people lining up for these units." His eyes lingered on Liam's art portfolio, propped carelessly against a bookshelf, then flicked to her, a cruel smirk twisting his lips. "Wouldn't want anything to happen to your boy's education now, would we?" The unspoken threat hung heavy in the humid air, suffocating her. He was hinting at more than just eviction. He was hinting at her son, at the very thing she fought so hard to protect. The cramped shotgun apartment, usually her sanctuary, suddenly felt like a cage, its walls closing in around her. Grace swallowed, a bitter taste in her mouth. She hated him, hated the way he used her vulnerability as a weapon. That night, back at the jazz club, the tension of Dubois' visit still hummed beneath her skin. Every customer seemed to grate. Every request felt like a demand. She moved slower, her smile thinner, exhaustion etched deeper into her features. She caught her reflection in a polished brass railing. Her eyes looked haunted. Then she saw him. Enzo Moretti at his usual prime table, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He wasn't looking at the band, wasn't engaged in conversation with anyone. He was watching her. His dark eyes, always so discerning, seemed to take in her every strained movement, every subtle sign of her increased stress. She tried to avoid his gaze, busying herself with refilling water glasses, but it was impossible. He was a magnet, drawing her attention even as she fought it. Finally, as she passed his table, he spoke, his voice low, a velvet rumble that cut through the club's din as if it were meant only for her. "Miss Morgan," he said, his lips curving into a slight, unreadable smile, "everything all right with your living situation?" The question, so casual, so pointed, hit her with the force of a physical blow. Her breath hitched. How did he know? How could he possibly know about Dubois, about the threat to Liam? A cold dread mingled with a reluctant flicker of something else, a dangerous, exhilarating sense of being seen, truly seen by a man who seemed to know all her secrets without her ever having to speak a word. Her guard shot up, but a fresh wave of unsettling curiosity, potent and undeniable, washed over her. He knew. And she had no idea what he intended to do with that knowledge. Grace's heart hammered against her ribs. Enzo Moretti's casual question, delivered with that unnerving calm, felt less like an inquiry and more like a pronouncement. He knew about Dubois, about the threats, about the razor's edge she walked. The thought was terrifying, yet a tiny, rebellious part of her felt a strange sense of relief, of finally being seen. She forced a tight smile, her voice brittle. "My living situation is my own concern, Mr. Moretti." He didn't smile back. His gaze was steady, unwavering, dark as the river at midnight. "Perhaps," he conceded, his voice a low thrum that bypassed her ears and settled directly in her chest. "But Dubois is becoming a concern for more than just you, Miss Morgan. He's a parasite, draining the life from this neighborhood, and I value stability. I value the people who make this city what it is." His eyes swept over the bustling club, then returned to her, heavy with unspoken meaning. "People like you." Grace felt a shiver trace down her spine. "What exactly are you offering, Mr. Moretti?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. She remembered his quiet assertion that the jazz club was his establishment, his subtle promise that her blind date wouldn't return. This man didn't just offer help. He offered solutions that came with an undeniable heavy weight. He leaned closer, the scent of expensive cologne, woodsy and masculine, enveloping her. "I'm offering to make your problem disappear," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Not as a handout, Miss Morgan, but as a mutual benefit. Dubois creates instability. I remove it." The words were vague, yet the implication was chillingly clear. He wasn't suggesting lawyers. He was suggesting something far more definitive. Her blood ran cold, then hot with indignation. She remembered his code, the quiet promise he'd made when he paid her bill: never take what isn't freely given. He respected boundaries, or so she'd hoped. She met his gaze, her chin lifting, a spark of defiance igniting in her eyes. "I will not be owned, Mr. Moretti," she stated, her voice trembling but firm. "Not by Dubois, and not by you. If you want to help, it has to be on my terms, a legal path, transparency, anything less, and I'll fight Dubois on my own." His dark eyes narrowed, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. Surprise, admiration. Grace couldn't tell. Her heart hammered, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She was speaking truth to power, a waitress daring to set terms with a man who could likely make entire buildings disappear. "My son, Liam," she continued, her voice gaining strength. He needs his special education program. He needs stability. Any solution must keep him safe, keep his life undisturbed, and keep my dignity intact. I won't be a pawn in your game, whatever game that is. She clutched the edge of her tray, her knuckles white. I won't trade one oppressor for another. A slow smile, devoid of humor, spread across his lips. It wasn't a cruel smile, but one of pure, unadulterated assessment. Dignity, he repeated, the word a soft caress on his tongue. I appreciate that, Miss Morgan. More than you know. He paused, his gaze sweeping over her face, lingering on her. Fierce eyes. You misunderstand me. I don't seek to own. I seek to protect what is mine, and by extension those under my protection. He didn't explicitly say she was under his protection, but the implication hung heavy in the air between them. A legal path, you say? He considered it, his thumb stroking the rim of his glass. It's slower, messier, but if that is your condition... Grace held her breath. She expected him to dismiss her, to laugh at her audacity. Instead, he seemed to be truly considering her words. The tension between them, already taut, intensified, shifting from confrontation to something else entirely, a dangerous, exhilarating dance of wills. Her wariness remained, a constant hum beneath her skin, but a new feeling mingled with it, a reluctant, undeniable attraction to the powerful man who saw her strength and surprisingly respected it. He wasn't just observing her anymore. He was engaging her, challenging her, and in his own strange way, honoring her. He saw the fire in her, the fierce maternal instinct that drove her, the integrity that refused to bend. And in that moment, Grace felt a thrilling, terrifying pull toward him, knowing that stepping into his world, even on her terms, would change everything. Yes, she affirmed, her voice steadier now. My terms. He nodded slowly, his dark eyes burning into hers. Then we will explore a legal path, he said, the words a promise, heavy with unspoken power. For now, try not to worry about Dubois. Focus on your son and your dignity, Miss Morgan. I assure you it will remain intact. He turned then, leaving her standing there, a whirlwind of emotions swirling within her. He had agreed, but she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that Enzo Moretti's version of a legal path might still be very different from her own. And she had no idea what she had just unleashed. Grace didn't know what to expect from Enzo Moretti's legal path, but she knew one thing. She wouldn't hold her breath. Her life had taught her that promises from powerful men often came with invisible strings attached. Still, a sliver of desperate hope flickered within her. She spent the next few days watching, waiting, her senses heightened, every conversation in the club a potential clue. Dubois, however, seemed oblivious. He still haunted the building, his presence a dark cloud. Yet Grace began to notice subtle shifts. Mrs. Rodriguez, a notoriously quiet tenant from the third floor, confided in Grace that a health inspector had made an unannounced visit to Dubois' laundromat downtown, citing minor infractions that had Dubois fuming. The next day, Grace overheard two jazz musicians grumbling about a new, surprisingly upscale bistro opening right across the street from Dubois' favored dive bar, threatening to steal his regulars. These weren't direct attacks, but they were pinpricks, calculated annoyances that seemed to be slowly tightening around Dubois, making him visibly agitated. He paced, he cursed, his usual oily composure giving way to a restless anger. Enzo, she realized, worked in shadows and whispers, his influence stretching further than she could have imagined. His legal path was a chess game, and Dubois was just starting to feel the pressure. Amidst the simmering tensions, a different kind of hope bloomed for Grace. Buoyed by the unexpected quiet support she felt from Enzo's unseen maneuvering, she'd found a renewed surge of energy. She spent her precious off-hours researching, poring over pamphlets and online forums for special education resources. One evening, after Liam was asleep, she stumbled upon a small, local non-profit offering partial scholarships for specialized tutoring. It was a long shot, but she filled out the application with a fierce determination she hadn't felt in weeks. A few days later, a letter arrived. A scholarship. Not full, but enough to significantly ease the burden of Liam's therapy costs. Grace stared at the official letter, tears blurring the words. It wasn't a direct gift, not from Enzo, but it felt connected, an affirmation of her fight. She pulled out Liam's school art portfolio, flipping through the fantastical creatures and vibrant landscapes he'd painstakingly brought to life. His future, his bright, imaginative world, felt a little more secure, a little more within reach. The brass keys to her apartment, usually a symbol of her entrapment, now felt like a key to something more, a door slowly creaking. Open? Enzo appeared at the club again that Friday night, settling into his usual table. Grace, serving a round of cocktails nearby, felt his gaze, a familiar weight on her skin. He waited until the rush subsided, until she was clearing empty glasses from a neighboring table. "Miss Morgan," he said, his voice low, drawing her in, "I trust your son is well?" Grace nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. "He is, Mr. Moretti, thank you." She hesitated. "Things seem to be shifting with Dubois. I appreciate your discretion." He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "I told you I value stability and community." He paused, his gaze distant for a moment, lost in thought. "My father, he came here with nothing, built everything from the ground up, brick by brick. He taught me that a man's true wealth isn't in his pockets, but in the strength of the streets he walks, the families he protects. He always said, a true boss doesn't take, he safeguards." His eyes returned to hers, suddenly intense. "He died before he saw his vision truly fulfilled, but I remember his code. It was a small window, a brief glimpse behind the formidable facade. Not a request for pity, but a quiet statement of purpose, a personal creed that resonated with her own fierce loyalty to Liam. He wasn't just a powerful man playing a game. He was a man driven by a legacy, by a deep-seated belief in community, however ruthless his methods might seem. The shared vulnerability, brief as it was, created a new kind of connection, a fragile thread woven between them. Grace felt her guard drop a fraction, her wariness softened by the unexpected sincerity in his eyes. She saw the man, not just the reputation, and a dangerous, undeniable curiosity deepened. She had glimpsed the honor in the monster, and it was a revelation that both thrilled and terrified her. Grace had barely dared to breathe, clinging to the fragile hope Enzo had ignited. The health inspector's visit, the new bistro, they were whispers of protection, subtle currents in the murky waters of her life. But Mr. Dubois was not a man to be deterred by whispers. His retaliation came swiftly, brutally, aimed directly at her most vulnerable point. A formal eviction notice arrived, taped to her door with aggressive finality. 3 days, not 30, 3. A chill that had nothing to do with the humid air seeped into her bones. But that wasn't the worst of it. The next morning, a call from Liam's school. His special education program, the one she'd fought so hard for, the one Enzo's subtle help had made possible, was being reviewed. The principal's voice, usually a soothing balm, was a tight wire, stretched to breaking point. "We don't understand it, Grace. Someone's asking questions, making demands about Liam specifically. It's highly unusual." Grace's stomach dropped. It wasn't an audit. It was Dubois, a direct hit. Her son, he'd gone there. Maternal ferocity, a primal roar erupted within her. She was no longer just scared. She was incandescent with rage. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about Liam's safety, his future. Her small apartment, once a haven, now felt like a paper-thin skin over a bubbling cauldron of threats. She stormed out of her apartment, a whirlwind of fury and fear, intent on confronting Dubois. But as she descended the creaking stairs, a glint of metal caught her eye. A brass key, small and ornate, lay discarded on the landing. It wasn't hers. It looked old, too fancy for a standard apartment key. Curious and fueled by a desperate need for answers, she picked it up. The key was cold and heavy in her palm, a tiny, dangerous piece of the puzzle. Her gaze drifted to a small, unremarkable door under the stairs, usually locked, leading to what she assumed was a dusty utility closet. No one ever went in there. On a hunch, she tried the key. It slid in smoothly, clicked with a soft snick, and the door creaked open, revealing not a utility closet, but a makeshift office. Dust motes danced in the sliver of light from the hallway. Inside, a cheap metal desk was cluttered with ledgers, stacks of cash bundled with rubber bands, and a small, whirring money counter. The scent of stale cigar smoke hung heavy in the air, mingling with the metallic tang of old money. Grace's breath hitched. Money laundering. This wasn't just a greedy landlord. This was a full-blown operation, hidden in plain sight. The eviction threats, the urgency to clear the building, it all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Dubois wasn't just evicting tenants for overdue rent. He was clearing out his illicit storefront, preparing for something bigger, something darker. Her building, her sanctuary, was not just neglected. It was compromised, tainted by illicit dealings. The brass key felt like a burning coal in her hand, a dangerous secret now hers. She backed out slowly, carefully, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She locked the door, pocketing the key. Her mind racing. She had proof. But this wasn't a problem she could solve with a scholarship application or a polite argument anymore. This was a viper's nest, and she had just stumbled into its heart. Later that night, the club felt different, charged with a new, terrifying energy. She saw Enzo Moretti almost immediately. He wasn't at his usual table, but tucked away in a shadowed booth, his face grim, his eyes scanning the room with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He looked up, meeting her gaze, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of genuine, unvarnished concern in his dark eyes. She approached his table, her legs feeling like lead. "Mr. Moretti," she whispered, her voice tight with suppressed panic and revelation. Dubois escalated. He went after Liam's school. Her hand instinctively went to her pocket, clutching the brass key. Enzo's jaw tightened, a muscle clenching. "I know," he said, his voice a low growl, devoid of its usual velvet edge. "My people picked up their chatter. He's connected to the Ginelli syndicate. They're moving in, trying to muscle out smaller operations. Your building is prime real estate for their secondary ventures." He paused, his gaze fixed on her face, assessing, seeing the terror and the fury warring in her eyes. The silence between them, thick with unspoken dangers, was more potent than any shout. "This isn't just about a landlord anymore, Grace. This is about organized crime, and you're in the middle of it." He didn't need to. He say, "I told you so." The gravity of his words, the grim set of his mouth spoke volumes. The stakes had just soared, twisting from personal desperation into something far more dangerous. Grace clutched the brass key in her pocket, its cold metal a stark reminder of the abyss she'd just peered into. Her small, defiant stand against Dubois had unwittingly plunged her into a world she couldn't possibly navigate alone. The monster wasn't just at her door, it was in her walls, and Enzo Moretti was the only one who truly understood its teeth. The grim reality of Dubois' threat, the chilling mention of Liam's school, ripped through Grace's carefully constructed defenses. She'd told Enzo she wouldn't be owned, wouldn't trade one oppressor for another, but now, standing in the tainted silence of her apartment, clutching the brass key that held Dubois' dirty secret, she felt utterly owned by fear. Not for herself, never for herself, but for Liam, his bright, imaginative world, so meticulously built, felt like it was crumbling around them. The thought of leaving New Orleans hit her with a sickening lurch, abandoning her job, her home, the only city Liam had ever known. But what was a home if it wasn't safe? What was dignity if it meant her son was in harm's way? She pictured Liam's face, his wide, trusting eyes. His art portfolio, now a symbol of everything she risked losing, lay on her small kitchen table, the crayon drawings vibrant and innocent. Leaving would be a surrender, a painful tearing away from everything familiar, but it would also be a shield, a way to protect him from the encroaching darkness, from Dubois' malice, and from the dangerous magnetic pull of Enzo Moretti's world. Enzo. His name echoed in her mind, a discordant note. He had promised a legal path, promised her dignity would remain intact. Yet since his intervention the stakes had skyrocketed. Dubois had gone from a greedy landlord to a ruthless syndicate enforcer. Was it a coincidence? Or had Enzo's very presence, his unspoken war with Dubois, merely amplified the danger? She couldn't entangle Liam in this. She couldn't allow Enzo's shadow to fall over her son. She had to pull back. She had to handle this on her own, no matter how impossible it felt. She started that night. The brass key became her constant companion, hidden beneath her mattress. Every spare moment was dedicated to documenting. She meticulously photographed the eviction notice, time-stamped her call to the school. She bought a small, cheap voice recorder and kept it close, hoping to catch Dubois in a moment of unguarded threat. The utility closet became her secret research lab. She'd wait until late at night when the building was quiet and slip in, carefully examining ledgers, scanning bank statements, her heart pounding with every rustle of paper. She found discrepancies, shell companies, transfers of staggering amounts of cash. The evidence piled up, a flimsy but growing stack of paper that felt like her only weapon. She avoided the club for 2 nights, pleading illness. When she finally returned, her eyes scanned the room, a tremor of apprehension running through her. He was there, of course, always there. Enzo Moretti. He sat at his table, a picture of quiet power, his gaze sweeping the room, then settling on her. She felt it, the invisible tether, the knowing look that seemed to penetrate her resolve. He didn't approach. He simply watched, and she, in turn, avoided. His gaze, busying herself with an almost frantic energy, pouring all her fear and defiance into her work. She was building her own fortress, brick by painful brick, determined to keep him out, to keep Liam safe. But Enzo's reach, she soon realized, extended far beyond the visible. She started noticing small things. A new, unfamiliar car parked down the street from her apartment building for hours, its occupants seemingly engrossed in a book. A delivery driver, not from Enzo's restaurant, who seemed to linger a little too long on her stoop, his eyes scanning the street. Once, she woke in the dead of night to the sound of hushed voices outside her window, a brief conversation she couldn't quite make out, before fading into the New Orleans night. She never saw Enzo, never spoke to him, but the feeling of being watched, of being subtly protected, was undeniable. He understood her need for autonomy, her fierce refusal to be owned, but he wouldn't let her fall. He was respecting her. Space, yet his watchful eyes, his unseen chess moves, never truly left her. She was alone, fighting her battle, but she was not completely unguarded. The knowledge was a strange mix of irritation and a reluctant comfort, a reminder that even in her desperate attempt to untangle herself, Enzo Moretti's shadow still loomed, a complex and dangerous presence in her life. Grace, armed with her meager stack of evidence and the chilling brass key hidden in her pocket, knew she couldn't wait. Dubois had attacked Liam, and that was a line she wouldn't allow to be crossed. She would confront him legally, directly. Her heart pounded with a mix of terror and righteous fury as she marched towards the address she'd found in Dubois' hidden ledgers. A dilapidated warehouse by the river, another one of his properties. The afternoon sun beat down, but a cold dread settled in her stomach. She carried Liam's art portfolio, not as a shield, but as a reminder of everything she was fighting for. Beside it, tucked into her oversized canvas bag, was a hurricane lantern, a practical necessity in her often flickering shotgun apartment, now a small flickering symbol of her own resolve against the encroaching darkness. She found Dubois in a shadowy office within the warehouse, the air thick with the smell of damp concrete and stale cigars. He looked up, his eyes narrowing at her unexpected appearance. Grace didn't waste time. She pulled out the eviction notice, the photos of his ledgers, the printout of the shell companies. She laid them on his dusty desk, her hand trembling but her voice steady. "Mr. Dubois," she began, "you're running a money laundering operation out of my building. You're harassing my son's school, and I have proof." She paused, pulling out the brass key and placing it beside the documents. "This unlocks your little hideaway under my stairs. I suggest you reconsider your eviction, and you leave Liam's education out of your dirty business." Dubois stared at the evidence, slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. He didn't deny it. He simply chuckled, a low, grating sound. "You think these trinkets mean anything, little waitress?" He leaned back, his eyes chillingly devoid of humor. "You think you can fight me? You think your pretty boy will be safe when I'm done with you?" Before Grace could respond, two burly men emerged from the shadows of the warehouse, their faces hard, their eyes fixed on her. They moved with a silent, menacing efficiency, blocking her exit. The air grew heavy, thick with unspoken threat. Grace's breath hitched. She clutched her bag, her knuckles white around the hurricane lantern. This wasn't a negotiation anymore. This was a trap. "Get her out of here," Dubois commanded, waving a dismissive hand, "and make sure she understands what happens when you cross me. Make sure she understands the cost of her independence." The men advanced, their shadows stretching long and distorted in the dim light. Grace's heart hammered. Against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure terror. She instinctively held the hurricane lantern up, its glass chiming faintly, a small, fragile light against the encroaching darkness of their forms. She backed away, stumbling, her mind screaming for an escape route that didn't exist. This was it. She had pushed too far. Just as the larger of the two reached for her, a sudden, piercing car alarm blared from somewhere just outside the warehouse, a jarring, insistent shriek that cut through the tense silence. It sounded impossibly close, like a siren had just exploded. The goons flinched, glancing towards the main door, their focus momentarily broken. Dubois cursed, pounding his fist on the desk. In that split second of distraction, Grace saw her chance. She darted past the stunned men, pushing open the heavy warehouse door with a desperate surge of adrenaline, sprinting out into the blinding sunlight and the clamor of the street. She didn't stop until she was blocks away, leaning against a damp brick wall in a secluded alley, gasping for air, her legs burning, her heart still trying to claw its way out of her chest. She was shaking uncontrollably, the hurricane lantern still clutched in her hand, its glass unbroken. No one had followed. The car alarm had died down. It had been too convenient, too perfectly timed. She hadn't seen anyone, but she felt it. A distinct shift, an invisible hand that had intervened, pulling her back from the brink. Enzo. It had to be Enzo. The terrifying near-miss shattered her illusion of independence. She had faced Dubois head-on, armed with her truth, and it had almost cost her everything. Her fierce pride, her stubborn refusal to be beholden, felt tragically naive now. She couldn't fight this alone. Not against Dubois, not against the syndicate. She needed help, real help, help with teeth, but not as a victim. Never as a victim. Grace pushed herself off the wall, her resolve hardening. She knew where she had to go. She walked, not back to her apartment, but towards the French Quarter, towards the familiar, dangerous glow of Enzo Moretti's jazz club. She entered, her eyes immediately finding him at his usual table, a quiet sentinel in the bustling room. This time, she didn't hesitate. She walked directly to him, the brass key and her meager stack of documents still clutched in her bag, the hurricane lantern tucked under her arm. "Mr. Moretti," she said, her voice raspy but firm, her eyes meeting his dark, assessing gaze. "You were right. I can't do this alone." She reached into her bag, pulling out the brass key, placing it on the table between them, a silent offering. Then she pushed the folder of documents towards him. "This is what I found. Money laundering. The Gianelli syndicate. The building is compromised." She took a deep breath, her gaze unwavering. "I need you to help me expose him, legally, publicly, but on my terms. This is a partnership, Mr. Moretti, not a rescue. I will not be owned, but I will fight with you." Enzo looked at the key, then at the documents, then finally back at her, his dark eyes burning with an unreadable intensity. A slow, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, a recognition of her courage, her raw, defiant strength. He knew the price she had just paid for her independence, and he saw that she was still willing to fight. And for the first time, Grace felt a surge of something more than just fear or reluctant attraction. She felt a profound, dangerous sense of shared purpose. Grace watched Enzo, her breath held tight in her chest. The brass key, the damning documents, they lay between them, stark symbols of the dangerous alliance she was forging. His dark eyes, usually so guarded, held a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher, approval, perhaps, or a predatory satisfaction. He didn't speak immediately. He picked up the brass key, turning it over in his fingers, then glanced at the folder. "The cost of independence," he murmured, his voice low, almost a caress. "A steep one sometimes." He looked up, meeting her gaze, his expression softening just a fraction. "You faced him, alone. You found this." He tapped the folder. "You're no pawn, Miss Morgan, you're the queen." The words, a surprising balm to her battered pride, sent a warmth through her. He understood. He truly understood. "So, a partnership?" she pressed, needing to hear it, needing to solidify her terms. "A partnership," Enzo confirmed, a slow, dangerous smile finally. Gracing his lips, it wasn't a smile of amusement, but of recognition, of shared purpose. "Consider Dubois' chess game officially over. Ours has just begun." Their collaboration began that very night. Enzo led her to a private, soundproofed room behind the club's kitchen, a space she never knew existed. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and the faint echo of distant jazz. He spread out a map of the French Quarter on a heavy oak table, his fingers tracing lines, marking properties. Grace recognized as belonging to Dubois. Grace, in turn, laid out her photos, her meticulously scribbled notes, the evidence of shell companies and cash transfers. "These ledgers," she explained, pointing to a photo, "they show weekly transfers to a series of numbered accounts, always on a Tuesday, always the same amount, give or take a few hundred. And this," she tapped the brass key, "unlocks the closet where he keeps his money counter." Enzo listened, his head slightly cocked, absorbing every detail. He didn't interrupt, didn't dismiss. His respect for her findings was palpable, a silent acknowledgement of her grit. Then he added his own intel, layering his knowledge over hers. The numbered accounts belong to Gianelli's front operations, a string of massage parlors and gambling dens in the Bywater. Dubois isn't just a landlord. He's Gianelli's local moneyman, clearing the building to expand their drug pipeline through the riverfront warehouses. The cold, hard facts of organized crime, spoken so casually, sent a chill down her spine, but knowing the full scope of the danger, seeing it laid bare, gave her a strange, defiant clarity. She wasn't fighting a lone wolf anymore. She was fighting a hydra. And Enzo Moretti was the only one who knew how to sever its heads. Their conversations stretched into the early hours, fueled by strong coffee and an unspoken intensity. Grace found herself revealing things she'd never told anyone, the depth of her fear for Liam, the suffocating weight of poverty, her desperate hope for a life free from constant worry. Enzo, in turn, offered glimpses into his own world, not just the ruthless tactics, but the underlying philosophy that guided him. "My father," he said one night, his gaze fixed on the map, "he built this, not just the restaurants, but a network of protection. He came from nothing, saw good people get chewed up and spit out. He believed in order, in justice, even if it wasn't always legal by the book. He taught me that power isn't about taking, Grace. It's about safeguarding, about giving a voice to those who have none." He looked at her, his eyes serious. "He always said, protect the workers, protect the families, because they are the roots of this city. Dubois, he's poison to the roots." Grace studied his face, the harsh angles softened by the dim light. She saw the conviction in his eyes, the deep-seated code that transcended his reputation. It wasn't just about power for power's sake. It was about a brutal, uncompromising form of justice, a protective instinct honed in the crucible of New Orleans' underbelly. The monster, she realized, had a heart, however dark and complex. And in that moment, she found herself not just trusting him, but feeling a dangerous, undeniable pull towards the man beneath the legend. The lines between protector and formidable ally blurred, replaced by a shared purpose that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. A soft knock interrupted their intense discussion. Enzo glanced up. "Come in, Marco." The door opened, revealing a man almost as impeccably dressed as Enzo, but with a leaner, more watchful presence. Marco, Enzo's consigliere. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, swept over the table, then settled on Grace, an unreadable intensity in their depths. He didn't offer a greeting, didn't smile. He simply observed, his gaze dissecting her, assessing her. Grace felt a prickle of unease. Marco was loyalty personified, Enzo's shadow, and his scrutiny felt like a silent challenge. He was a silent, calculating presence, and Grace knew instinctively that he missed nothing. His presence introduced a new, subtle tension to their already charged alliance. The blueprint for Dubois' downfall spread across Enzo's private table, a meticulously planned attack that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. Grace traced a finger over the map of the warehouse district, a grim determination setting her jaw. "We need to hit him where it hurts." "Most," she affirmed, her voice steady, "publicly. And we need the tenants to be there to see the truth for themselves, to feel empowered." Enzo watched her, a flicker of admiration in his dark eyes. A public spectacle, he mused, a slow smile playing on his lips. My kind of chaos, Miss Morgan. We'll arrange a tenants' meeting, a neutral location, perhaps one of my bywater warehouses. Plenty of space, hard to miss. He leaned in, his voice dropping. We'll gather every piece of paper, every witness. We'll expose Dubois' money laundering, his syndicate ties, the whole rotten mess. We'll make it undeniable. Grace felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it, not just fighting for herself, but for everyone Dubois had exploited. She and Enzo worked tirelessly, sifting through her documents, cross-referencing with his intel. Marco, Enzo's consigliere, often observed from a quiet corner, his sharp eyes missing nothing, a silent, calculating presence that made Grace vaguely uncomfortable. Even as she appreciated his efficiency, he was a shadow, always there, always watching. Their plan solidified, a public meeting, a presentation of evidence, a moment designed to force a lawful inspection and strip Dubois of his power. They were setting a trap, and Grace felt a fierce, almost vengeful satisfaction. One evening, after another late planning session, Grace walked home, the humid New Orleans night wrapping around her like a warm blanket. Her mind buzzed with details, strategies, the exhilarating rush of finally having a path forward. She was halfway down her block, the familiar glow of her hurricane lantern in her bag, a comforting weight, when a figure stepped out from the deep shadows between two gaslight balconies. Grace stopped dead, her heart leaping into her throat. Marcus! Her blind date, the man who had ditched her with a 187 bill, stood there, looking far too concerned, far too clean for someone who'd vanished without a trace. He wore a crisp linen shirt, his expression a carefully constructed mask of worry. Grace, he said, his voice smooth, almost theatrical, I've been so worried about you. After that night, I felt terrible. Something came up, an emergency, I swear. I tried to find you. He took a step closer, his eyes scanning her face. But then I saw you, with Moretti. Grace felt a cold unease creep up her spine. His concern felt hollow, his words rehearsed. What about it, Marcus? She asked, her voice sharper than she intended. He lowered his voice conspiratorially. Look, Grace, I heard things. Moretti, he's a dangerous man. He's involved in some heavy stuff. I just don't want to see you get caught up in it. You're a good woman, a single mom. You shouldn't be associating with his kind. His eyes lingered on her, probing, searching. He's got a way of pulling people into his world. What exactly is your arrangement with him, Grace? Are you working for him now? Is he helping you with your landlord problem? His questions were too specific. He knew about her landlord. He knew about Enzo. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening lurch. The emergency that night, his sudden disappearance, the way he seemed to know things no casual acquaintance should. It wasn't just a blind date gone wrong. He wasn't just worried, he was fishing. Grace felt a sudden chill, a sense of profound betrayal. She remembered the strange car parked outside her apartment, the lingering delivery driver, the hushed voices in the night. She'd attributed it to Enzo's watchful eye, his subtle protection. But what if it wasn't just protection? What if it was surveillance? Her eyes narrowed, her internal alarm bells ringing furiously. The casual concern in Marcus's voice now sounded like a carefully orchestrated interrogation. My arrangement with Mr. Moretti is my business, Marcus, she stated, her voice icy. And my landlord problem is also my business, just like your sudden reappearance and your very specific question seem to be someone else's business entirely. She took a step back, a new, unsettling suspicion taking root deep within her. He wasn't acting alone. He was a planted seed, a pawn in a game she hadn't fully understood until this moment. She saw the flicker of surprise in his eyes, the brief crack in his facade. The truth, ugly and manipulative, began to dawn on her. Someone was testing Enzo, and someone was testing her. Grace didn't sleep. Marcus's words, his feigned concern, replayed in her mind like a broken record, each repetition twisting the knife of suspicion deeper, planted, fishing, to gauge Enzo's interest, to see if she could hold her own. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She hadn't just been ditched, she'd been tested, manipulated, a pawn in a game she hadn't even known she was playing. The humiliation of the blind date, which she'd finally started to bury, resurfaced with a burning intensity, now layered with a bitter taste of betrayal. She found Marcus the E.A.'s next morning, not at the club, but at a coffee shop in the quarter, pretending to read a newspaper. He looked up, a flicker of surprise, then forced casualness, when he saw her. Grace didn't waste time. She pulled up a chair, her eyes blazing with a fury she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. "Don't bother with the pleasantries, Marcus," she said, her voice low and steady, laced with ice. "Let's be clear. You weren't worried about me. You were sent to watch Enzo and to watch me. Tell me, who sent you now?" He flinched, his composure cracking. His eyes darted around the busy cafe, then back to her. He swallowed hard. "Grace, I can explain." "No," she cut him off, leaning across the table, her gaze unwavering. "You can confess. Who planted you and why?" He slumped, defeat etched on his face. "Marco," he finally mumbled, barely audible over the clatter of cups. "Enzo's consigliere." He thought Enzo was losing touch, becoming too focused on the bigger picture, not enough on the people, the tenants. He wanted to see if Enzo would step in for someone like you, to see if he still had a heart, I guess. And if you were strong enough to be worth the trouble. He looked up, shame in his eyes. "I just followed orders. I needed the money." Grace recoiled as if struck. Marco, Enzo's shadow, the man whose piercing gaze had always made her feel like she was under a microscope. He had orchestrated this entire charade. It wasn't just Marcus. It was Enzo's inner circle, playing with her life, her pride, her son's future, as if she were a mere variable in their complex equations. The rage that had been simmering within her boiled over. She felt cheap, used, the object of a cruel experiment. She stood abruptly, the chair scraping loudly across the tiled floor. "Thank you for your honesty, Marcus," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "You've been incredibly helpful." She turned and walked out, leaving him to his shame, her destination clear. She found Enzo and Marco in Enzo's private office, the scent of expensive cigars and old leather filling the air. They were hunched over the same map of the quarter, immersed in their strategic dance. Grace didn't knock. She pushed the door open, her entrance abrupt, her face a mask of furious calm. Enzo looked up, surprise flickering in his dark eyes, then concern. Marco, ever watchful, simply narrowed his gaze. "Marco," Grace said, her voice dangerously quiet, "I just had a very enlightening conversation with Marcus, your little plant." Marco's face remained impassive, but his eyes flickered to Enzo, a silent acknowledgement of the game being up. Enzo's jaw tightened, his gaze snapping to his consigliere, then back to Grace, a storm brewing in their depths. "He told me everything," Grace continued, her voice rising now, the carefully constructed facade beginning to crack. "About how you set me up on that blind date, how you tested Enzo, tested me to see if I was worth the trouble, to see if Enzo still cared about the common people." She slammed her palm flat on the oak table, making the map tremble. "My life, my son's future, my dignity, none of it is a game for your twisted little experiments, Marco." She whirled to face Enzo, her eyes burning with raw hurt and anger. "And you, Mr. Moretti, you knew, didn't you? You let them use me. You let them play with my life, all in the name of your noble code." Enzo rose slowly, his presence filling the room, but his usual calm was gone, replaced by a palpable tension. "Grace," he began, his voice rough, "I did not orchestrate this, but I knew of Marco's concerns, and I did not stop him. For that, I take full responsibility." He looked at Marco, his eyes colder than Grace had ever seen them. "You overstepped, Marco, severely." Marco finally spoke, his voice measured, devoid of apology. "My loyalty is to you, Enzo, and to the community you protect. I feared you were losing sight. I needed to ensure your focus remained where it needed to be. Miss Morgan's situation was opportune. She showed remarkable resilience." "Resilience?" Grace scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "I showed resilience because I had no other choice, not because I wanted to be your damn guinea pig." She took a deep, shaky breath, fighting back the sting of tears. "I told you I wouldn't be owned. Not by Dubois and not by you. I came to you for a partnership, for a legal path, with transparency, not to be manipulated and tested like a lab." "Rat." She pointed at the map, then at the documents. "All of this? It stops. Right now. I will not move forward until I receive a genuine apology from both of you, and an absolute, ironclad guarantee that there will be no more secrets, no more tests, no more manipulation. My terms, Mr. Moretti. Or I walk, and I take my evidence with me." The silence that followed was deafening, thick with unspoken power and shattered trust. Grace stood her ground, trembling but unyielding, her eyes locked with Enzo's. She had flipped the script. The power dynamic, once so clearly defined, had fractured, and in the wreckage, Grace Morgan, the single mum who had been ditched for $2, had finally seized control of her own narrative. The silence that followed Grace's ultimatum was heavy, suffocating. Every breath she took felt like a challenge, every beat of her heart a drum against the oppressive quiet. She stood her ground, trembling but unyielding, her eyes locked with Enzo Moretti's. She had laid bare her hurt, her rage, and now she waited. Enzo's gaze, which had been fixed on her, slowly shifted to Marco. There was no theatrical outburst, no raised voice, just a cold, dangerous stillness that radiated from him, more terrifying than any shout. "Marco!" Enzo said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that barely cleared his throat, yet it vibrated through the room, cutting through the tension. "You crossed a line. My line. We protect the innocent, Marco. We do not manipulate them. We do not use them as tools for our own assessments." His eyes, dark and icy, bore into his consigliere. "You will apologize to Miss Morgan. Now." Marco, ever the stoic, finally broke his impassive facade. A muscle twitched in his jaw. He turned to Grace, a subtle dip of his head. "My methods were misguided, Miss Morgan. My intent was for Enzo's benefit, and by extension the community's. But I regret the distress and insult my actions caused you." His apology was clipped, professional, but Grace saw the grudging respect in his eyes, the acknowledgement of her force. Then Enzo turned back to Grace. His dark eyes, usually so guarded, held a raw, unvarnished sincerity that stripped away his usual formidable aura. "Grace," he said, stepping closer, his voice softer now, yet still carrying immense weight. "He was wrong, and I was wrong to allow it, to not intervene the moment I suspected. My code, the one I spoke of, is about protecting, about honor, and there was no honor in this deception. My concern for you, for Liam, for this community is real. My offer of protection is genuine. I swear to you, on my father's memory, there will be no more hidden agendas, no more tests, no more manipulations, only truth, and a true partnership, if you'll still have it." His words, spoken with such conviction, washed over her. The fury that had burned so hot began to recede, replaced by a profound weariness and a fragile sense of validation. He understood, he truly understood the depth of her betrayal, and he was offering something more than just words. He was offering his integrity, his code, as a guarantee. The monster had not only revealed his code of honor, but he had laid it at her feet. Grace took a shaky breath, her gaze searching his, seeking any hint of falsehood. She found none, just a stark, compelling honesty. "I accept your apology, Mr. Moretti," she said, her voice still a little hoarse. "And yours, Marco." She turned to Enzo, her chin lifting. "But a partnership, as I said, has terms. My voice will be heard in every decision, every step. I am not just a witness. I am an active player, and I want complete transparency from here on out. No more whispers, no more shadows around me or my son. You want my trust? You earn it every single day." Enzo gave a slow, firm nod. "Consider it earned. Every day." He extended a hand, not for a handshake, but an open gesture of alliance. Grace hesitated for a fraction of a second, then placed her hand in his. His grip was warm, strong, encompassing, a silent promise. "Now," Grace continued, pulling her hand back, a new resolve hardening her features. "About this tenants' meeting, we need to make it undeniable. We need to make sure Dubois and his syndicate can't sweep it under the rug. I want to be the one to present the evidence, to speak for the tenants." Enzo's eyes gleamed with a fierce approval. "Excellent," he murmured, a dangerous smile touching his lips. He turned to the map. "Then we refine the plan. You will be at the center, Grace, the undeniable voice. Marco, you will ensure every detail of the evidence is airtight, every logistical element perfect. No room for error, no room for escape." The air in the room, once thick with tension, now crackled with a renewed energy, a focused, shared purpose. Grace felt a surge of adrenaline, not of fear, but of exhilaration. The friction, the confrontation, the raw honesty, it had stripped away the superficial layers, exposing the solid bedrock of their combined strengths. They were no longer just reluctant allies, but partners, operating with a clearer, more profound trust. The fight ahead was still dangerous, but now, facing Enzo across the oak table, planning their next move, Grace felt a thrilling certainty that together they could win. This was more than just a battle for her building. It was a battle for her voice, her dignity, and her place in a world she was finally, irrevocably, choosing to claim. The air in the Bywater warehouse hung thick with a nervous humidity, clinging to Grace's skin like a shroud. It was a cavernous, slightly dilapidated space near the river, chosen for its size and its neutral ground, yet it pulsed with an unspoken tension. Over 50 tenants, faces etched with worry, and a flicker of desperate hope filled the folding chairs. Grace stood on a makeshift stage, a single spotlight illuminating her, making her feel both exposed and powerfully visible. Enzo's crew, subtle as shadows, were positioned strategically around the perimeter, their presence a quiet assurance in the charged atmosphere. Enzo himself was near the back, his dark eyes fixed on her, a silent anchor in her churning stomach. Grace clutched her notes, but her gaze swept over the crowd, connecting with each worried face. Mrs. Rodriguez, the quiet tenant from the third floor, sat clutching a rosary. Old Mr. Henderson, who had lived in the building since his wife passed, leaned forward, his hearing aids straining. They were here because they believed her, because they had nowhere else to turn. This wasn't just about her anymore, it was about all of them. She took a deep breath, the scent of dust and old concrete filling her lungs. "Mr. Dubois," she began, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the murmurs, "has been systematically exploiting us. He's not just a landlord. He's a pawn for the Gianelli syndicate, using our homes to launder money, to expand their criminal enterprise." She laid out the evidence, piece by damning piece, the photos of the ledgers, the shell companies, the specific dates and amounts of cash transfers. Her voice gained momentum, fueled by the righteous anger that had simmered for weeks. She spoke of the threats, the intimidation, the deliberate neglect of their homes. She spoke of Liam, of the attack on his school, and a collective gasp rippled through the room. The tenants shifted, their fear slowly morphing into a simmering outrage. Just as she was detailing Dubois' connections to the riverfront warehouses, a sudden violent flicker plunged the entire warehouse into absolute darkness. Grace gasped, her heart leaping into her throat. A collective cry of alarm, a wave of panicked whispers swept through the room. The carefully constructed order of the meeting shattered into instant chaos. Someone screamed. Chairs scraped loudly as people instinctively scrambled to their feet. Her mind, despite the sudden surge of terror, snapped into focus. This wasn't an accident. This was Dubois. This was the syndicate, a deliberate power cut. In the sudden, suffocating blackness, Grace remembered the hurricane lantern. It had been her idea, a practical precaution. She fumbled in her bag, her fingers brushing against the cold metal, then finding the striker. With a quick practice motion, she ignited it. A small, defiant circle of light blossomed around her, pushing back against the encroaching shadows, illuminating her resolute face. "Stay calm!" Grace's voice, amplified by pure adrenaline, cut through the rising panic. "Everyone, stay calm. We knew this might happen." But the darkness was overwhelming, the fear contagious. From the deeper shadows, figures began to emerge, not from the door, but from the hidden recesses of the warehouse itself. Burly men, their faces obscured by the dimness, moved with a menacing slowness, fanning out, their intent chillingly clear. Goons, Dubois' muscle, their presence alone was enough to make the air crackle. With palpable intimidation, "What are you waiting for?" A harsh voice boomed from the back, clearly Dubois. "Get them out of here, and get that evidence." The goons advanced, their heavy footsteps echoing ominously. The tenants recoiled, some whimpering, others clutching each other. Grace held the lantern high, its frail light a beacon against the encroaching danger. She could feel Enzo's gaze on her, a steady, unwavering force from the back of the room, but her focus was on the faces before her, the fear in their eyes. She wouldn't let them be silenced. "No!" Grace shouted, her voice shaking but unyielding. "Don't move! Don't let them intimidate you! We have rights, we have proof!" She planted her feet, her body a small, defiant barrier against the advancing shadows. The hurricane lantern, her small, flickering light, suddenly felt like a weapon, a symbol of everything they were fighting for. She stood her ground, a single mom, a waitress facing down a syndicate, her courage burning brighter than the flame in her hand. The real test had just begun. Grace's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the encroaching darkness. The goons advanced, their looming silhouettes made even more terrifying by the flickering, defiant light of her hurricane lantern. Fear, cold and sharp, threatened to paralyze her, but a primal scream of defiance echoed in her mind. No, not like this. Not for Liam, not for any of them. She squeezed her eyes shut for a split. Second, a frantic prayer, a desperate search for a solution, the plan. Enzo's quiet words, their contingency plans, suddenly flooded her mind. If things go south, create a disturbance, something undeniable, something that brings in the authorities. Her eyes snapped open, The fire alarm. It was located near the main entrance, a bright red box against the drab concrete wall. A desperate, brilliant spark ignited in her mind. It was reckless. It was chaotic. But it was public. It was undeniable. It was the only way to turn this intimidation into an official documented event. With a surge of adrenaline, Grace pivoted. She didn't run from the goons, she ran past them, a blur of motion in the lantern's erratic light. Their surprised grunts were lost in the rising clamor of the tenant's fear. Her worn-out shoes pounded against the concrete floor, her breath ragged in her chest. Every muscle screamed, but she pushed harder, her gaze fixed on the bright red box, a beacon in the terrifying dark. She reached it, her fingers fumbling for a second, then closing around the small pull handle. No hesitation, no second thoughts, only the fierce, unwavering resolve of a mother protecting her child, a woman defending her community. With a grunt, she yanked down hard. A piercing, guttural wail ripped through the warehouse, shattering the darkness, tearing through the panic. The fire alarm, loud enough to wake the dead, screamed its warning, a deafening siren that echoed off the high ceilings, vibrating through every bone in her body. It was a sound of chaos, but to Grace it was the sweet, glorious sound of salvation. The effect was instantaneous. The goons froze, their menacing advance broken. Dubois, from the back of the room, bellowed a frustrated curse. The tenants, initially startled into a fresh wave of panic by the alarm, now looked around, a glimmer of understanding, then hope, dawning in their eyes. The alarm wasn't just a warning, it was a call to arms. Within minutes, the distant wail of sirens grew closer, then closer still. Red and blue lights flashed through the grimy warehouse windows, painting the interior with frantic, shifting colors. A cacophony of shouts, the blare of air horns, and the heavy thud of boots on pavement erupted outside. Firefighters, police, and then camera flashes. Grace saw them first, a small gaggle of local journalists, their faces grim, their cameras already rolling, pushing past the uniformed officers. Enzo's crew, she realized with a fresh jolt of understanding, had done their job. They hadn't just called the fire department, they had tipped off the press, ensuring a public spectacle, an undeniable lawful inspection that Dubois could not escape. As the heavy warehouse doors burst open, revealing the blinding glare of emergency lights and the stern faces of the authorities, a new controlled chaos erupted. Firefighters, axes in hand, streamed in, their voices calm and authoritative, ordering people to evacuate. Police. Officers followed, their eyes sweeping the room, immediately spotting the armed goons lurking in the shadows. The dynamic had flipped, brutally and completely. Amidst the confusion, Grace felt a strong, encompassing hand on her arm. She turned, and there he was, Enzo Moretti. He moved with a quiet, dangerous grace, his dark eyes fixed on her, a fierce pride mingling with something else she couldn't quite name. He didn't speak. He simply stood beside her, his body a solid, unyielding shield between her and the unfolding chaos. His presence was a silent, powerful reassurance, an anchor in the storm she had unleashed. Dubois, his face contorted with rage and disbelief, was already being questioned by a uniformed officer. His plan had backfired spectacularly. His intimidation tactic had become his public downfall, thanks to one single mom with a hurricane lantern and a desperate, defiant pull of a fire alarm. Grace looked at Enzo, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. The spark, she realized, had ignited a wildfire. The warehouse, minutes ago a crucible of fear, was now a whirlwind of flashing lights and authoritative voices. Firefighters barked orders, their hoses uncoiling like giant serpents. Police officers, grim-faced, moved with practiced efficiency, cuffing Dubois' stunned goons, who offered no resistance against the sudden, overwhelming force of law. Dubois himself, sputtering with impotent rage, was being led away in handcuffs, his furious protests swallowed by the blare of sirens and the shouted commands. The syndicate's local operation, hidden for so long, was crumbling before their eyes. Grace stood beside Enzo, his presence a solid, comforting anchor in the chaos. The hurricane lantern, her small beacon of defiance, lay forgotten at her feet. Her body still thrummed with residual adrenaline, but a profound wave of relief washed over her, light and intoxicating. They had done it. She had done it. Then the microphones appeared. A swarm of local journalists, drawn by Enzo's carefully placed tips and the sheer spectacle, descended. They pushed past the police tape, their cameras flashing, their recorders thrust forward. What happened here? Who is this landlord? Are these residents safe? A reporter, a sharp-faced woman with a frantic glint in her eye, spotted Grace. "You, ma'am, you were speaking when the power went out. What can you tell us?" Grace felt Enzo's hand gently squeeze her arm. A silent question. She looked at him, then back at the eager faces, the hungry lenses. This was her chance, not just to expose Dubois, but to reclaim her narrative, to speak for every tenant, every struggling family, to show them she was not a victim, but a voice. She stepped forward, her shoulders straightening. "My name is Grace Morgan," she began, her voice clear, surprisingly steady, cutting through the din. "I'm a tenant in one of Mr. Dubois' buildings, and for weeks he has been threatening us, extorting us, trying to evict us to make way for a money-laundering operation run by the Gianelli syndicate." She didn't flinch from the cameras. She looked directly into them, her eyes blazing with a quiet fire. "He went after our children's schools. He neglected our homes. But tonight we stood up. We gathered here to expose him, and when he tried to silence us with darkness and intimidation, we fought back." She gestured to the handcuffed goons, to the police inspecting the makeshift office. "This isn't just about uncrooked landlord. This is about protecting our community, our families, from predators who think they can take what isn't freely given." Her words resonated, crisp and powerful. The reporters scribbled furiously, their questions momentarily silenced by the raw honesty of her account. She spoke with a calm authority that belied her trembling insides, articulating the abuses, the fear, the struggle, her dignity shining brighter than any spotlight. She was no longer the waitress left with a bill. She was the defiant voice of a community, an undeniable force. Enzo watched her, a slow, profound smile spreading across his lips. He saw the fierce intelligence in her eyes, the unwavering courage that had not only pulled the alarm but now commanded the attention of the city. He had seen strong women before, but none like Grace. She had fought for her freedom, asserted her terms, and now, standing in the wreckage of a syndicate's downfall, she was truly magnificent. His pride in her was immense, a quiet, powerful wave that settled deep in his chest. When the last reporter had drifted away and the initial wave of arrests was complete, Enzo approached her, stepping out of the shadows, his face etched with a complex mix of admiration and something deeper, something vulnerable. "You were extraordinary, Grace," he said, his voice a low rumble for her ears alone. "You commanded the room. You gave them a voice." Grace met his gaze, exhaustion finally seeping into her bones, but her spirit buoyant. "We gave them a voice, Enzo," she corrected gently. "Together." He nodded, acknowledging her correction, his dark eyes searching hers. "Yes, together." He paused, a beat of profound silence hanging between them, thick with unspoken possibilities. "This city, it needs people like you, Grace, people who fight for what's right, people who build, not just tear down." He reached out, his hand gently touching her cheek, his thumb brushing away a stray smudge of dust. The contact was electric, a jolt of warmth that spread through her weary body. "I don't demand, Grace. I never will. But I offer a partnership, a future, where your strength is valued, where your voice is paramount, a place where you and Liam are truly safe, truly free." Her heart hammered against her ribs. He wasn't offering a rescue. He was offering a future, a true collaboration. He wasn't trying to own her. He was inviting her to build with him. She had fought for her freedom, for her dignity, and now, standing before him, she knew her choice was clear. It wasn't about being saved. It was about choosing her own path with a partner who saw her as an equal. Grace looked into his dark, compelling eyes, seeing the respect, the admiration, the unwavering support. She had fought for this, she had earned this, and in his gaze she saw not just a powerful man, but a man who finally, unequivocally, accepted her on her own terms. "Yes, Enzo," she said, her voice a soft, certain whisper. "A promise given. Freely, truly. A partnership. On my terms." His lips curved into a slow, breathtaking smile, and in that moment, under the chaotic lights of the warehouse, amidst the lingering scent of smoke and victory, Grace knew she had chosen not just a future, but a true home. Months later, the humid New Orleans air still clung to Grace Morgan, but now it carried the rich scent of roasting coffee, simmering spices, and fresh-baked bread. The old building, once a symbol of Mr. Dubois' greed, now stood proud and vibrant. A non-profit land trust, fueled by restitution funds from the seized syndicate assets, had purchased it. The tenants were safe, secure, their homes no longer threatened by shadow or extortion. Mrs. Rodriguez still lived on the third floor. Mr. Henderson still sat on his porch, and Liam's special education program was fully funded, his art portfolio overflowing with even more fantastical creatures. Peace, Grace realized, was a real thing. Her own life had blossomed in ways she never imagined. She still worked, but her uniform was no longer the black skirt of a jazz club waitress. Now she moved with confident purpose through the sunlit, bustling kitchen of the Hearth, Enzo Moretti's new family-friendly bistro. The aroma of her own creation, a spicy shrimp and grits wafted from the stove, a testament to her new role. She was no longer just serving food, she was creating it. Her culinary insights and creativity valued, celebrated. Her name, Grace Morgan, was proudly displayed on the co-writer credit of the bistro's vibrant, seasonal menu. Every dish was a story, every recipe a reflection of the community she had fought so hard to protect. Enzo had been true to his word, and more. The Hearth was a beacon in the neighborhood, a place where families gathered, where workers found good meals at fair prices, where the sense of community was palpable. His support for the land trust was unwavering, his quiet philanthropy woven into the very fabric of their new reality. He hadn't just removed a parasite, he had planted roots deep and strong. Their romance, once a dangerous dance of wills and veiled threats, had settled into a grounded, mutual partnership. The dark magnetism was still there, a simmering current beneath the surface, but it was now tempered by profound respect, shared purpose, and a deep affection that needed no grand gestures. He valued her voice, her fierce independence, her unwavering moral compass, and she, in turn, saw past the formidable reputation, past the powerful boss to the man beneath, the man who protected, who built, who remembered his father's code with every decision. One brisk autumn evening, the bistro was abuzz with laughter and conversation. The warm glow of hurricane lanterns, a subtle nod to her own defiant light, flickered on every table. Grace, wiping down a counter in the bustling kitchen, felt a familiar presence beside her. Enzo. He stood there, leaning against the polished wood, his dark suit a stark contrast to the apron he now often wore when helping in the kitchen. He watched her, a soft, unreadable smile playing on his lips. "The Creole jambalaya is a hit," he murmured, his voice low just for her. "Another one of your masterpieces, Chef Morgan." Grace laughed, a genuine, joyful sound that reached her eyes. "It's a team effort, Mr. Moretti. You chopped the onions." He chuckled, a rich, warm sound. He reached out, his calloused thumb gently brushing a stray strand of hair from her temple. "You found your voice, Grace," he said, his eyes serious, filled with an emotion that made her heart ache in the best possible way. "And you helped me remember mine." She leaned into his touch, a quiet comfort settling over her. The kitchen, once a place of frantic labor, was now a sanctuary, filled with warmth and light. She looked at him, truly looked at him, seeing the strength, the kindness, the quiet devotion that had become the bedrock of their life together. "We built this, didn't we?" she whispered, her gaze sweeping around the vibrant kitchen, then back to his steady eyes. He nodded, a profound sense of peace settling on his features. "Roots and recipes, Grace. Roots and recipes." He leaned down, his lips brushing hers in a soft, tender kiss that spoke of shared battles, quiet victories, and a future they were building, brick by loving brick, together. In his arms, surrounded by the warmth and light of their creation, Grace Morgan finally knew what it felt like to be truly home, truly seen, and truly unequivocally loved. If you enjoyed the video, tell us where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel to keep up with our content.